December 8, 1941, 2:47 in the morning. The underground communication center beneath Imperial General Headquarters smelled of cigarette smoke, sweat, and the acrid tang of overheated vacuum tubes. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo stood motionless before the decoder's station, holding a single sheet of paper that contained 11 words in English, freshly translated into Japanese characters that seemed to blur and refocus before his eyes. Congress declares war. House vote 388 to 1. Senate 82 to 0. His hands did not tremble. Not yet. That would come later. Around him, 17 officers maintained an absolute silence that felt heavier than any sound. The decoder, a young lieutenant whose name Tojo would never remember, had stopped speaking mid-sentence, his voice simply ceasing as though someone had switched off a radio. Through the concrete walls, 70 feet above their heads, Tokyo slept, unaware that the foundation of every strategic calculation, every diplomatic assumption, every military projection had just dissolved into something worse than error, irrelevance. The message continued, typed in the mechanical precision of teletype. Total elapsed time from presidential address to formal declaration. 33 minutes. 33 minutes. Tojo read the number 4 times, certain there had been a transcription error. 33 days would have been optimistic. 33 weeks had been the baseline assumption, but 33 minutes suggested something Japanese intelligence had declared impossible, that a democratic nation of 130 million people, fractured by isolationist sentiment, paralyzed by congressional procedure, softened by 2 decades of peace, could move with the decisiveness of a military dictatorship. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo entered the room at 3:05, carrying a leather portfolio that had belonged to his predecessor. He said nothing, simply placed translated excerpts from President Roosevelt's congressional address on the table between them. Tojo recognized genuine fear in Togo's expression, not the diplomatic concern of a career minister, but the visceral terror of a man watching his understanding of reality collapse. Roosevelt's speech contained no preamble, no diplomatic cushioning, no room for interpretation. 7 minutes of controlled fury, declaring a date which will live in infamy, speaking not as a president requesting permission, but stating historical fact. The prose was stripped clean of everything except purpose. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. Then the transformation. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. Righteous might, absolute victory. These were not the words of a nation preparing to negotiate. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto arrived at 3:15 in the morning, still wearing the informal uniform he had been sleeping in when the summons reached his quarters. He was the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man who had orchestrated the most successful naval surprise attack in modern warfare. 6 battleships destroyed or crippled, hundreds of aircraft obliterated, America's Pacific Fleet capability devastated for what Japanese planners had estimated would be 18 months minimum. He read the message once, then looked up at Tojo with eyes that held no satisfaction, no pride, only the hollow recognition of catastrophic miscalculation. They moved faster than any democracy in recorded history, Yamamoto said softly. This is not the response of a nation seeking terms. This is the response of a nation that has been given permission to stop holding back. The words hung in the stale air of the bunker like smoke from an extinguished fire. Permission. That was the word that captured it. For years, Japanese intelligence had documented American isolationism, the America First Committee, the congressional deadlock, the powerful voices arguing against foreign entanglement. They had studied the polls showing 70% of Americans opposed to war in Europe. They had cataloged the industrial strikes, the political divisions, the comfort-seeking mindset of a wealthy nation grown soft on consumer goods and entertainment. What they had failed to understand was that all of that opposition was not weakness, it was restraint. And restraint, once released, transforms into something altogether different. The morning brought reports that read like dispatches from an alternate universe. The America First Committee, the organization that had held a rally of 40,000 people in Madison Square Garden just months earlier, dissolved itself by noon. Senator Burton K. Wheeler, who had declared that Roosevelt's foreign policy would plow under every fourth American boy, pledged total support within 6 hours. Charles Lindbergh, the aviator whose isolationist speeches had drawn thousands, volunteered for military service before sunset, but it was the industrial reports that transformed concern into existential dread. By December 9th, 72 hours after the attack, factory owners across America were contacting the War Department requesting permission to convert to 24-hour production schedules. Labor unions that had called strikes in November suspended all work stoppages indefinitely. General Motors sent a telegram offering to halt all civilian automobile production immediately and retool their plants for military vehicles and aircraft. Ford, Chrysler, and Studebaker followed within hours. The United States Steel Corporation announced it would increase production capacity by 40% within 90 days. 40% in 90 days. Tojo sat in his office on December 10th, reviewing intelligence files that now read like evidence of willful self-deception. 17 cables from Ambassador Kichisaburo Nomura warning about American industrial capacity, dismissed as pessimism. 12 reports from military attachés about American readiness and technical capability, filed away as irrelevant. 8 formal assessments suggesting that American isolationism was political theater rather than genuine strategic weakness, ignored because they contradicted what Japan's leadership wanted to believe. The most damning document was a technical analysis from 1939, authored by a junior naval officer who had toured American automotive plants during a diplomatic mission. The report, buried in ministry archives, had calculated that American automobile production alone, if converted to military purposes, could outproduce Japan's entire industrial economy within 6 months. The officer had been quietly reassigned to an administrative position in Manchuria. War Minister Hajime Sugiyama arrived on December 11th with new calculations that went beyond pessimism into the realm of horror. His staff had spent 3 days running numbers based on the latest intelligence from inside the United States. American aircraft production could double within 90 days, not through building new factories, but simply by converting existing automotive plants and running them continuously. The shipyards could launch 1 cargo vessel every 2 days using prefabrication techniques Japanese engineers barely understood. Within 4 months, American military production would surpass Japan's total capacity. Within 8 months, they would be outproducing Japan by margins that made comparison meaningless. But the war will not last 8 months, someone said. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that silence meant. The war would last much longer than 8 months, and every month would widen the gap between Japanese capability and American production until resistance became not heroic, but simply mathematical impossibility. Yamamoto walked to the wall map of the Pacific, studying the vast blue distances between Tokyo and San Francisco, between Japan's resource-starved islands and America's continental abundance. He spoke quietly, but everyone heard him. "I told them," he said, "I told them exactly this would happen. Americans do not lack capability. They simply lacked a reason to use it. Now we have given them that reason. We have not wounded them. We have awakened them." The admiral traced his finger across the map, from Pearl Harbor to the Philippines, from Singapore to the Solomon Islands. We needed them weak, divided, uncertain. Instead, we have made them unified, purposeful, and absolutely certain of their objective. We needed them to debate and delay. Instead, they acted in 33 minutes. He turned from the map. 33 minutes. Do you understand what that means? It means every assumption we built this war upon was fantasy. On December 11th, Emperor Hirohito summoned Tojo to the imperial palace for a private audience. In a chamber that had witnessed 8 centuries of imperial history, the Prime Minister knelt before his sovereign and spoke words he had never imagined voicing. "Your Majesty, we have achieved a great tactical victory. 6 battleships destroyed, hundreds of aircraft eliminated, thousands of enemy casualties. By every measure, Pearl Harbor succeeded beyond our operational objectives." He paused, feeling the weight of the next sentence like a physical force. But strategically, we may have committed an irreversible error. We did not paralyze America. We unified them. We did not discourage their entry into war. We gave them clarity of purpose. We did not weaken their resolve. We gave them permission to use their full strength. The emperor, who rarely spoke directly in such meetings, asked a single question: "What do our strategists now project?" Tojo's hands trembled as he answered: "Your Majesty, we believed American democracy made them weak. We studied their debates, their divisions, their reluctance to sacrifice comfort for duty. We built our entire strategy on the assumption that democratic nations are slow to anger and quick to seek peace. And now we understand that democratic nations at peace are indeed slow to anger, but once awakened, once given clear purpose, they possess a capacity for total mobilization that we did not anticipate. They fight not through compulsion, but through genuine national unity. An authoritarian system can force compliance, but a democratic system, once truly committed, generates voluntary sacrifice and innovation we cannot match." The audience lasted 17 minutes. When Tojo emerged, his face had aged a decade. By December 20th, the final comprehensive intelligence assessment arrived at Imperial General Headquarters. 147 pages of analysis, technical specifications, production projections, and strategic calculations that all arrived at the same inescapable conclusion: the United States possessed the industrial capacity to produce more military equipment in a single year than Japan could manufacture in a decade. This was not propaganda or enemy exaggeration. It was mathematical fact, verified by Japan's own industrial engineers. Moreover, American industrial conversion was accelerating beyond even the most optimistic projections. The Boeing plant in Seattle was already producing bomber aircraft at a rate Japanese factories could not match with fighters. The shipyards in Newport News had reduced destroyer construction time from 14 months to 7. Automotive plants were producing military trucks at a rate of 800 per day. 800 trucks per day. The report included a section on American morale that read like a death sentence for Japanese strategy. Recruiting stations across the United States had been overwhelmed with volunteers, so many that the Army had to turn away applicants and create waiting lists. War bond sales in the first week exceeded projections for the entire first month. Scrap metal drives organized by civilians collected materials faster than government agencies could process them. The report's final section posed a single question that no one wanted to answer. Given current production trajectories and demonstrated national unity, how long until American military capacity makes Japanese resistance strategically meaningless? The calculation was precise: 18 to 24 months, less than 2 years until victory becomes impossible and surrender becomes inevitable. Tojo took the report to his private office and read it 3 times, searching for some error in calculation, some overlooked factor that might change the mathematics. He found nothing except confirmation that Japan had not attacked a weak nation, it had attacked a peaceful one, and those 33 minutes had removed that peace forever. In the weeks that followed, Japanese intelligence continued providing updates that read like chapters in a horror story. American war production was not just accelerating, it was transforming. Factories that had never produced military equipment were now manufacturing artillery shells, bomb casings, and military electronics with quality that matched or exceeded Japanese standards. Women were entering the workforce in numbers that Japanese analysts initially reported as typographical errors, millions of women taking positions in factories, shipyards, and technical facilities. The cultural assumption that democratic societies, particularly prosperous ones, would prove soft and unwilling to endure hardship was disintegrating against the reality of American response. Food rationing began voluntarily before it was legally mandated. Automobile owners organized carpools to conserve rubber and gasoline. Families planted victory gardens and collected scrap metal from their own homes. This was not the response of a nation at war. It was the response of a nation that had decided, collectively and irrevocably, that nothing else mattered until victory was complete. Yamamoto received regular updates on American naval construction that tracked the resurrection of American Pacific capability. The battleships damaged at Pearl Harbor were being raised, repaired, and modernized. But more significantly, new construction was proceeding at a pace that Japanese naval architects had declared physically impossible. Aircraft carriers, the ships that would determine control of the Pacific, were being built in months rather than years. By March of 1942, American shipyards were launching one escort carrier every week, one carrier every week. At this rate, within a year, America would possess more aircraft carriers than Japan could construct in a decade. The mathematical inevitability of defeat was becoming clear to anyone willing to examine the numbers honestly, but honesty had become dangerous. Officers who reported accurate intelligence about American capability were quietly reassigned. Strategists who suggested negotiated settlement were accused of defeatism. The truth was being sacrificed to maintain morale and avoid confronting the magnitude of the miscalculation. Tojo understood the psychology perfectly. He had participated in it himself. Acknowledging error meant admitting that hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers and sailors would die in a war that had been unwinnable from the moment Roosevelt's speech ended and the congressional vote completed in 33 minutes. It meant confronting the reality that Pearl Harbor's tactical success had guaranteed strategic catastrophe. Better to fight, to hope for miracles, to believe that Japanese spirit could overcome American material advantage. Better to avoid calculating the actual probability of victory, which every honest analysis placed at less than 5%. In April of 1942, Yamamoto organized the attack on Midway Island, hoping to draw out and destroy the remaining American carrier fleet. If successful, it would buy Japan time, perhaps enough time to force negotiations before American production made resistance meaningless. The operation failed catastrophically. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, a quarter of its total carrier strength, in a single battle. American codebreakers working with captured Japanese communications equipment had known the attack was coming. The United States had broken Japan's naval codes. How long had they been reading Japanese communications? Weeks? Months? Every secret, every plan, every strategic calculation potentially compromised. Tojo received the report in silence. There was nothing more to say. The war's outcome was no longer being decided in battles yet to be fought. It had been decided on December 8, 1941, in those 33 minutes when America stopped debating and started deciding, when Congress moved with the speed of a military command, when 130 million people unified around a single purpose. Japan had not attacked a weak nation, it had attacked a peaceful one, and those 33 minutes had removed that peace forever, replacing it with something Japan had never anticipated, the full industrial, technological, and human capacity of a continental democracy unified by clarity of purpose and absolute determination. In his private moments, Tojo would return to that original message, the one that had arrived at 2:47 in the morning. 11 words that had shattered every assumption. Congress declares war. House vote 388 to 1. Senate 82 to 0. 1 dissenting vote. A single representative, Jeanette Rankin of Montana, a pacifist who had also voted against American entry into World War I. One person in a nation of 130 million who had said no, which meant 129,999,999 had said yes. 33 minutes. The number haunted him like a ghost. 33 minutes to do what Japanese planners had sworn would take months. 33 minutes to transform isolationism into unity, debate into decision, peace into total war. Japan had believed American democracy made them weak. Too many voices, too many opinions, too much debate. What they had failed to understand was that democratic debate at peace becomes democratic unity at war, that all those voices arguing and disagreeing can align behind a single purpose once given sufficient reason, and Japan had given them that reason. By 1943, the mathematical inevitability of defeat was undeniable even to the most optimistic strategists. American production had exceeded every projection. The Pacific was being flooded with American ships, aircraft, and supplies at rates that made Japanese resistance not heroic, but simply futile. Every island defended, every battle fought, only delayed the inevitable while consuming irreplaceable Japanese resources. Tojo resigned as prime minister in July of 1944, replaced by General Kuniaki Koiso, who inherited a war that had been lost 3 years earlier in 33 minutes, but would continue for another year, consuming hundreds of thousands of additional lives. The final irony arrived in August of 1945, when the United States demonstrated a weapon that represented the ultimate expression of American industrial and scientific capability. Atomic bombs derived from a research program that had consumed $2 billion and employed 130,000 people across dozens of facilities. The Manhattan Project was American productive capacity made manifest, the ability to pursue an idea from theory to devastating reality in less than 4 years. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, 45 months after Pearl Harbor. 45 months after those 33 minutes that had decided everything. Tojo would face trial as a war criminal, would be convicted and executed on December 23, 1948. But before the sentence was carried out, he gave a final interview to an American journalist, speaking through a translator in a prison cell that smelled of concrete and disinfectant. The journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. When did you know Japan would lose the war? Tojo was silent for a long time, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes focused on something the journalist could not see. December 8, 1941, he finally said, 2:47 in the morning. When I read that your Congress had declared war in 33 minutes. We believed your democracy made you weak. Instead, we discovered it made you patient. And when your patience ended, it ended completely. He paused, then added, we defeated ourselves. We gave you the one thing you needed, a reason to stop being patient. We mistook restraint for weakness. It was our fundamental error, our fatal error. The interview ended. Tojo returned to his cell. The journalist filed his story, which was published in the New York Times 3 days before the execution. The number would appear in history books, documentaries, and academic studies. 33 minutes. The fastest congressional war declaration in American history. The moment when isolationism dissolved and unity emerged. The moment when Japan's strategic calculations collapsed into irrelevance. But numbers, no matter how dramatic, cannot fully capture what those 33 minutes meant. They meant that democracy, messy, argumentative, seemingly inefficient democracy, could move with decisive speed when given clear purpose. They meant that a nation devoted to individual liberty could achieve collective unity without compulsion. They meant that prosperity and comfort had not made America weak. They had made America capable, and once given reason to use that capability, the response was overwhelming. 33 minutes to change history. 33 minutes to transform peace into war. 33 minutes to teach the hardest lesson of the 20th century, that awakening a sleeping giant is easy, but surviving what happens next is impossible.